really what I would call the Bert Bell draft, and it should be called that today, by the way. This is why I say he's the father of modern television. It's the Philadelphia Eagles.
And this is it. We are with today Mr. Upton Bell. How are you, Upton?
I'm doing great. I'm fine here in this country. I just got the blessing from the new Pope, who went who, who actually, more background. I went to Malvern Prep, which was the prep school for Villanova, where the Pope actually graduated from. I was taught by the same priest, the Augustinian priest. I was going to go to Villanova, but decided I wanted to play basketball because I played basketball in college. So I went to LaSalle instead of Villanova. But I'm still a Villanovan. So good luck to the Pope.
Yeah, good luck to the Pope. And today we have a tremendous honor to have you today on our show, a French show, and it's an honor for me, and I can't wait to hear all the story that you will share today. But the first one has to be center on you, because maybe there is person that do not know you. How could you introduce yourself to the Europeans and all the people in the world that don't know you and your family?
First of all, I have a special place in my heart for France
Thank you.
and for Europe, way before football.
Okay.
The reason that I have a great love for Europe and in particular France, in 1917, Bert Bell, my father, was named the captain of the Penn football team. He had led them to the only appearance by an Ivy League team in the Rose Bowl in 1917 and through the first pass in Rose Bowl history. In 1917, he played his last game on Thanksgiving Day, and unbeknownst to the university, he had decided to volunteer for the First World War. And he went down to the armory right after the game, registered, and was in 6 months training. And he went with another famous person who France will recognize, Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly's father, John B. Kelly, who was a great boxer and a great rower, they both joined together. And they ended up, after 6 months, in France. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Theory in France. They were right outside of Theory during some of the battles. Bert Bell and John B. Kelly, but especially my father, was eventually cited by General Pershing for gallantry in the field. He was with a hospital unit. He had no gun. And yet, when they were being bombed by the Germans, my father stayed behind, volunteered, and stayed with the wounded all the way through, even though one of his friends sitting right next to him was killed instantly. Uh, he continued, he volunteered. He loved France. Now, this part of it, other than the sad death part of it, is interesting because John B. Kelly was a great boxer. So my father and Kelly, who liked to have a drink in the different, shall we say, bars of France, went from one place to another. And my father would go in and pick a fight and say, you know, I'll bet you that my friend here, who the French didn't know, my friend here uh, is a pretty good fighter. So you pick out the best friend you have in the bar, and he will fight them. Kelly won every fight. Of course, they didn't know that Kelly was just about a professional until one last stop where Kelly got the hell beat out of him. And my father and Kelly gave them what would be coupons today for one of the American stores and got out of there as quickly as possible because they knew sooner or later that they would recognize that's not the money that they bet on. So there's a great feeling for France. And actually, after the 1968 Super Bowl in 1969, I took my winning share as the personnel director of the Colts. And the first place I wanted to go, I said, I'm going to France first. I'm going to go on the continent. I'm going to go to England. I'm going to go to Rome. But I want to go to France. I flew directly to France, went out into the Chateau country to Chenonceau. How's that for French pronunciation? And then came back into Paris and sat. And I asked you this earlier in the week. Is there still a cafe that I sat in for hours called La Coupole?
Yeah, La Coupole. Yeah.
La Coupole. I would sit there for hours and people watch and absolutely loved it. So I have great affinity for the French people and for the continent itself. It was absolutely a great experience. But I will say now, continuing the story, my father goes back at the end of the war, goes back to Philadelphia, goes back to Penn, and he and Kelly become lifelong friends. And that's how I met Grace Kelly. And she did, of course, married the Prince of Monaco. And I always consider Monaco France. So, forget it. Forget it. It's France, baby. Yeah, yeah, it's France. So they became lifelong friends. And of course, Grace Kelly didn't live far from us outside of Philadelphia. But when he went back, he actually ended up going back and captaining that last season. And by the way, another interesting tidbit, his father, who was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, second in seniority on the Walter Camp Rules Committee, his father helped negotiate with Teddy Roosevelt, saving college football. His father also was one of the people. He was the person that actually founded the modern NCAA today. So a lot of background as far as the law was concerned. His father was a lawyer and attorney general. His father then was the person years later who agreed to let my father use the hotel for the first draft in NFL history. But anyway, great line. My father was graduating from Haverford School and was a three-star athlete there. And his father was asked, well, where is your son, Bert Bell, going to go to college? And this was the headline in the Philadelphia paper. My son, Bert Bell, will go to Penn or he'll go to hell. That was the headline. That was the pressure that he ended up going to Penn and again playing there. But then he went back and became an assistant coach to John Heisman of the Heisman Trophy. So
Okay.
all along, he basically, it was from one kind of exciting thing to another, and actually, during those years, he was also a gambler, a drinker. Went to Saratoga Racetrack, and met many of the other people, and somehow in those days, show business, gangsters, everybody kind of mixed. A little different than today. We just have big time gangsters. They're politicians. So basically, he even knew who Al Capone was. And when there was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, people went to my father and said, can you get some word to Capone about the Lindbergh baby? And he did through an intermediary. And within 24 hours, Capone told the person who told my father it was not an underworld job, that it had to be a kidnapping. So, I mean, we could spend hours just telling you stories about everything other than the NFL and how it came about and stuff like that. But I thought I would give your audience a background
Yeah.
of what life was like. Now, as he moves along, he his father was one of the richest men in Philadelphia, had the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, many other beautiful places. His father had to constantly bail him out. He lost right near 1929. he lost $100,000. Think of what that would mean in today's money in the stock market, and his father bailed him out. So all along the way, his father would bail him out. But finally, his father said, no more. No more money for you, Bert. I love you, but that's it. So at that time, along comes the other part of my family, Francis Upton. My father is at a party in New York City at Charles Lindbergh's place. How's that? Another man who landed in France at Orly Airport. And he meets Francis Upton, who is one of the biggest stars on Broadway, made movies, everything else like that. Now, quickly, Francis Upton, why do I tell you and your audience about that? Because she is the key to Bert Bell, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the NFL. Francis Upton doesn't come along, that's it. He meets her at the party. He said, hey, honey, how would you like to go out on a date? And she says to him, Bert, I don't date drunks and I don't date playboys. At the time, she was engaged to Bernard Baruch's son. Bernard Baruch was one of the richest men in America and also was the chief financial advisor to President Roosevelt. So there she is. She's engaged. She pushes him off. He keeps pursuing her. And finally, she agrees to come to Philadelphia, and they have their first date at Franklin Field, where he used to play for a Penn football game. Now, her background, because she traveled all over, especially to Chicago with the Ziegfeld Follies, is that basically she saw a lot of pro football. And she said to my father, why are you playing around with college football, the pro game, the Chicago Bears, the New York Giants, the Washington Redskins, all of this stuff? She's lecturing him on the importance of the NFL. Ironically, her father, who spoke 6 languages, never finished high school, originally from Ireland, her great-grandfather wrote a book called Uncle Pat's Cabin that's still around 100 and some years later today on Amazon. You can get it. Her father was able to become a detective with the New York Police Department because he spoke all the languages and was sent into different areas of New York. The Black Hand then, which later became the Mafia, the Italian section, the German section. He could go in there as an undercover cop and be able to bring out, the people that were committing the crimes. I know I'm going around about, but I have to paint this picture of how the NFL ended or how it became what it was. So basically, there's Frances Upton, one of the big stars on Broadway, and her story. How does she end up meeting Al Capone? Her roommate was Ruth Etting. There is a movie that was a very famous movie. Maybe a lot of your audience has seen it, called Love Me or Leave Me, with Doris Day and James Cagney. It's the true story of Moe the Gimp Snyder, a Chicago kind of gangster who Etting fell in love with. And basically, the story was that my mother and Ruth Etting, who were in the shows together at the Ziegfeld Follies, would travel together, and they would both sleep with pistols, guns under their pillow, because Moe the Gimp Snyder was so jealous of Ruth Etting that he would basically come in and threaten to shoot the place up if he thought she was seeing another man. So they end up again in Chicago at a very famous restaurant. Ruth Etting says to her, we're going to this dinner tonight. Moe the Gimp wants us, she didn't call him a gimp, wants us to go. And they ended up at a dinner for Al Capone. And Capone and all of his henchmen were sitting with their backs to the wall. And my mother and Ruth Etting and all of these other people were sitting with their backs to the door. And this is in a book about my father. And my mother says to Capone, oh, Mr. Capone, is there any reason why we're sitting on the opposite side of the table? And Capone never answered her, and she was kicked by Effingham and said, "That's because if they come in the door and want to kill him, we get hit first." So, so that's basically how they kind of got together. She goes to the games. She breaks, and I asked her years later, why would you ever break an engagement with one of the richest men in America for a man, my father, who had no money except for his father? And she said, I just had a feeling about him, what he was, who he was, and who knows why. They eventually got secretly married. It was announced by the biggest journalist in America at the time, Walter Winchell, about the secret wedding. Anyway, trying to make a long story short, she comes to Philadelphia. They do get married. She insisted, because she was Catholic, that they get married in the church. They do get married. They walk down to a place in a court where the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who had been NFL champions a couple of years before, were in bankruptcy. She gives him the money to buy the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets out of bankruptcy. They're walking back after the purchase, and they look up. That's why I have my eagle hat on. They look up and see on a big billboard Franklin Delano Roosevelt's National Recovery Act, the eagle. And my father said, there it is. It's the Philadelphia Eagles. So anybody who wonders, and I told this story when a statue was erected a few months ago, sees there's a lot of luck to life. There's a lot of things going on, but that's how they ended up becoming the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, we'll get into the rest of history, because for years they lost money. His father said, "Bert, I love you, not one nickel for the Philadelphia Eagles. You can do whatever you want." Well, after continually losing, and I grew up living in the same house with 33 football players. I mean, but one guy got $5 extra a week because he was my babysitter. And so his name was Bull Lipsky. And so my father finally, after losing so much, went to the owners at the league meeting in 1935 in Pittsburgh and said, basically, "Gentlemen, I and other teams, we keep losing. I'm paraphrasing. I'm an embarrassment to the league. I want to see if you would be willing to pass an NFL draft where the worst teams, in inverse order to the best teams, would draft first and foremost up and down the thing." Basically, after some argument, the owners went for it. It was Tim Mara, the Giants, said, "You know what?" My father said, if we don't exist together, we will die together. And actually, since 1920, when the NFL was kind of founded in Canton, Ohio, in a showroom, automobile showroom, basically 20 teams had already gone out of business. So he was telling the owners, this is our fate. We don't do something. So Bert Bell, they passed really what I would call the Bert Bell draft, and it should be called that today, by the way. Um, and that really saved football. The first draft was held, and this is another lesson for the NFL and all of their analytics and their scouting system and their pro days and all the other crap you hear. That basically the first draft was held in Philadelphia at his father's hotel because nobody could afford anything, and none of the media showed up. They did it on a blackboard. They had no advanced scouting reports. They had the Street and Smith magazine. They had calls out to college coaches. And basically, out of that draft, with no information like you have today, 4 of the players are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The 5th player was Bear Bryant, the legendary coach who decided not to play pro football. and actually end up, as we know, at Texas A&M and then the legend at Alabama. So that's how the draft that Bert Bell invented started off. If he did not, and you might think this is over dramatic, if he did not, we would not be talking today. Somebody might have founded a new league, but clearly, except for a few teams, they were going out of business. And as I learned years later, in owning my own team in the World Football League, that if you don't have a league to play in, you're dead. And that's what happened to us. We went out of business after 2 years. So that's kind of the beginning of the game and where it went. Bert Bell then, after a few years, sold the Eagles. No, they swapped him with Art Rooney and the Steelers, and he became 50% owner of the Steelers. He's the only coach, by the way, in history, and there was a story written on it in the Boston Globe. He's the only owner in NFL history who was also the head coach of the Steelers, who walked in to Art Rooney, his partner, and said, "I'm firing myself. I stink. I'm not doing a good job." The guy in history, all these guys today, they don't want to get fired. And if they get fired, they make millions of dollars. He said, "I'm not doing a good job. So that's it. I'm firing myself." So that's just good. That's just part of it. And then, of course, after that, the owners picked Bert Bell, and you would think this guy hasn't won anything. Yes, he invented the draft. He's very, very smart and everything else like that. But usually owners pick a powerful person like themselves, as we see even today, is that they picked him because they knew not only did he have the best interests of the league in his heart, that he was very innovative. Now, one of the other things is, I think it was 1937 or 1938, and this is why I say he's the father of modern television, even though people will say it was Pete Rozelle. Bert Bell's Eagles are playing the Brooklyn Dodgers. Yes, there was a Brooklyn Dodgers in the NFL at that time. And it was the first televised game as an experiment for the World's Fair in New York by NBC. My father saw what television could do. And when he became commissioner, among the many other things that he did, he married television to football and understood that this was the future of football. Why is the NFL so big on the continent? France, Rome, Germany, it's because of television.
Yeah,
It's because of
absolutely.
Christmas Day, millions tune in from around the world to get suckered in by Netflix to watch a doubleheader that stunk. So, so that's just some of the things he did. But once he became commissioner, and this is another story, you could see that all of the things that he learned in life. Remember, he was not only an owner, he was a coach, he was a player. So people say to me, "Well, you were son of a commissioner." I said, "No, I'm son of a quarterback and a coach." And I think strategically like that. So that were many of the things that he did came from that background that started off as a quarterback into a coach, into an owner, into a commissioner. No commissioner in the history of pro sports, I don't care where the hell they are, ever walked into a job so well prepared as Bert Bell.
Wow. I'm a kind of speechless now because in just a few minutes I know now how the Philadelphia Eagles have been created, how the NFL draft is created, and the Bert Bell NFL draft, we should say, and all the stories about how football uh, is today and transcend the frontiers and become a worldwide sport. I mean, try to become a worldwide sport, because there is a long journey to be able to uh, be a worldwide sport like soccer is, for example, or basketball or tennis, and other sports, of course. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm kind of confused about the question I need to ask now because you give me so much information. But uh, if we're going back to you, Upton, you grew up inside the NFL. So, what are your earliest memories of the league?
Well, I mean, my earliest memories were basically living with a football team in the same house with 33 players,
Yeah,
and
as you said.
how crazy it was, and for me, for a child growing up, uh, what could be better? I didn't know whether we had any money or not. I really didn't care, and I still don't care, because if I could say to your audience again is it's what you get out of life. It's not how much you make.
Yeah,
It's feeling all of those things about life that they're important. Friendships, even enemies. How do you band together like a football team? What are the disparate personalities? Who are these people? What are they about? What are their lives are about? How I believe I greatly believe in struggle. That I'm not talking about being so totally down, but I'm talking about struggle really makes the human being as far as I'm concerned. And so I saw that struggle as a boy, but it wasn't coated in sweetness, but it wasn't like the world's going to end. There's a famous story written by Arthur Daly, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of the New York Times, that said a couple of things. One, he said if Bert Bell had no other monument, his monument is the founding of the Pro Football Draft. But he also tells a story which I learned later on because I lived in Philadelphia. I lived in various houses. I lived in Pittsburgh. I've lived in Baltimore. I've lived in Charlotte. I've lived in Boston. I've lived in Philly. I've lived everywhere. And one of the things, the story he tells, he told many funny stories about my father. Uh, but one of the stories that he told is that basically here is they're in the middle of the Depression and he's with the Steelers, and they can't pay the grocery bill. The grocer has said to my father and Art Rooney, "No more credit. You can't feed the team." So my father says to Art Rooney, uh, "We need to trade a player." And we need to trade them for not another player. Let's trade them for cash. So they did. They traded up one of their better players to the Philadelphia Eagles, his old team, that was willing to give them cash back, and that's how they paid. That's how they paid the grocery bill. Also, during the Second World War, there was a meeting of the NFL owners, and they had decided that they were going to shut the league down. And my father said to them, again, this is where he helped save the league. My father said to them, if you shut down, you'll never open again. So, what was his remedy to it? The Steelers and the Eagles, which became the Steagles, merged together. The Cardinals and the Steelers, different teams did it. There is a book written by a very, very famous author, and I believe his wife is a European diplomat, that the book is called The Steagles, on how Bert Bell again stepped in and saved the NFL with this merger of different teams to survive during the war. He also understood that there was another league coming along, which would be the old All America Conference, which produced the Cleveland Browns, the 49ers, and the Baltimore Colts. My father always saw far ahead about these different things. And that's one of the moves he did during the Second World War to save the whole thing. He also, again, going back, understood what it was mean to be a poor team in the league, in that there was an owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers who had just become engaged to the very famous star who won the Olympics, Sonia Henne. who was one of the great figure skaters. So my father had called him and said, "Listen, I know you're coming to play in Philadelphia." He said, "But I haven't sold a ticket. It's raining. Let's just call the game off." And he said, "Listen, you son of a bitch." He said, "I just got engaged to Sonia Henney, and I promised her I'm going to show her a game." So he comes to Philadelphia. And the night before the game, again, Arthur Daly happened to be in the restaurant. So the owner says to my father, "I'll tell you what I'll do." This is what it was like then. He said, "Let's flip a coin." He said, "If you win, we don't play the game." He said, "If I win, we play the damn game." My father said, "I won't do that. That's not the right thing to do." So as a result, they played the game, driving rainstorm. Nobody showed. Everybody in the press box. It's the lowest attended game in NFL history. There we go. Too many. I mean, I well, I know when I began to in our home there were I don't know how many phones. My father, when he come home from work, would be on the phone morning, noon, night. In fact, I said when he died, suddenly I said a phone should be in the casket. My mother said, "Shut up in there." But that's so. As a result, I could probably do another book other than my own on just conversations with the commissioner, because as a child growing up, you listen to everything. And one of the things that I've learned in my own career on radio and television is to listen to what people say. Don't talk over them. Let them do it. So I remember this one time, 1946, his first year as commissioner, and the Bears are playing the New York Giants in New York championship game. That day, he gets a call because normally he'd take the train to New York, be there the night before. Gets a call from Mr. Bell. "This is Frank Hogan, district attorney in New York. We need for you to come to New York immediately because a bribe has been offered to two of the Giants' star players. We need you to come to New York immediately." I heard the conversation. Jumps on the train, goes to New York. They call the two players in, Frank Filchak, who was the starting quarterback of the Giants, and Merrill Hapes, who was one of their running backs. My father, again, saved the NFL because that night he agreed to let Filchak play in the game. He suspended Merrill Hapes for life. And basically, after the game was over, because the headlines. I mean, those days, unlike today, newspapers are not what they used to be, as we know. Uh, if that had happened and he hadn't taken the steps, can you see it across the country? It would have been again the end of the NFL. Gambling scandal. Players, agree to bribe and throw the game. He immediately, again, next day, called his friend Davey O'Brien, who was the Heisman Trophy winner, who he had signed as a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles and played for him, had left the Eagles to join the FBI and is one of the best pistol shots in America. And at that time, my father called him and said, "I need ex FBI men in every city. We'll pay them and they will report to us on any type of gambling scandals or anything else that are going on with the players and over their meeting or talking to gamblers." That helped save the league. And today, the NFL has one of the biggest security apparatuses in sports. But again, he took that step immediately, or if not, again, that's another flashpoint of the NFL.
Wow. You know, the more I listen to you, the more I think that today's in Europe and especially in France with the Paris Musketeers, the only professional team playing the European Football League, uh, they're creating a franchise from the beginning, and they should listen the story because uh, it's fascinating how you have to be creative to be able to create opportunities. And if you had to speak to the owners of the Musketeers, what could be the advice that you can give them on, because this team has been built 3 years ago, so it's a very young team. What could be advice you give them to create a
Well,
successful franchise?
well, the first thing is there are three things. There are three kind of building blocks. Find a really good coach. Be able to sign, be able to sign really good players, and especially ones that are the new school that have appeal to the fans. It's like soccer. I mean, who can't name Pelé and many of the great soccer players that play on the continent, play in France, play everywhere. Find people who are not only good at playing, but also are those maybe outsized personalities, because you're really starting from scratch again, even though the NFL had the World NFL League of Europe for a while. You're doing that. You're doing that again. The other thing is that I think you really need, the ownership needs to be able to use this medium, particularly television, to promote their team and the league they're playing in. Ironically, when I owned a team in the World Football League that only lasted 2 years, I said, it's a World Football League. I recommended that they go to Europe and South America and basically sign up or get a business, a big business, to own the team, where the players would work for the team year round. They would play, but they'd also have a job in the off season. They would be representatives of that team and of that league. And they turned it down. I said, well, that'll be the death of this. And certainly it was. So that type of advice, you've got to get people interested in your product. And how do you sell product? Look at all the different teams in America, let's say, and even what they're promoting and going to London and all over Europe. They'll eventually go to China and other places like that. I'm not sure they'll ever establish anything there, but basically, they're 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 also selling personalities. Who doesn't know that Aaron Rodgers is a great player? You know, they're they're they promote names. They know how to do it. NFL Films, and I knew the people who originated. NFL Films sold the product to America. TV sells it. The NFL Network. You need all of that to surround that, to sell your product. It's no different in some ways in whatever you're selling, automobiles, you name it. This is the way you sell your product. The game will sell itself. The football is a game. It's violent. They're going to face the problems of CTE. They're already facing it, but particularly in the future. And I predict, by the way, and this is a sign for Europe, the whole continent, is that there will someday, long after I'm gone, be a form of flag football. You won't always have the head snapping back, the violent collisions that they have. That's a thing that the NFL faces. But if you look at it, it's the most perfect game for television, and it's fast and it's quickness. And let's face it, I don't care what people say, particularly in this country. People love their violence. You know, it's not ultimate fighting. It's not boxing, which is practically dead, but it is that whole idea, hand to hand combat. That's, like it or not, the public likes it.
So I hope they will answer to you about those advice, because it's great, as you said, to learn from people and listen people talking, and some in some ways, when you are in the middle of your thing, you not really open your eyes, and sometimes you forget things. So it's always good to have the great advice. And you give me so much that I'm kind of speechless, and I brought a lot of questions, but you almost say anything that I want to ask you. But do you want to add some stories that you didn't explain in this show about your father, the NFL, how this sport grew up and born, because you know now Europe and the rest of the world will know that sport better, and it's better that they are learning that game with the right history, not just the history from today. We have to go back through what happened to understand what will happen.
If you don't know history, you don't know anything in
Of
life.
course.
Just look back. All the lessons that we've learned, history constantly repeats itself. And I can think of so many stories in history that's been part of my life and part of watching a league grow from next to nothing to the most powerful league, second only to soccer in the world. And basically, soccer is not a violent sport. It's a sport of, it's my version of watching bullfighting without the bull getting killed. The movement of the matador and the great movement of the soccer players. You
Yeah.
have that in football, but you also have the hitting part of it, which again they have to deal with it. But I can think of this first training camp that I went to outside of my father's own training camps and I was too young then, is in 1946. I was 9 years old, my father's first year as commissioner, and he sent us out, my brother and myself, out to the Chicago Bears training camp. The monsters of the Midway, George Halas, Sid Luckman, a lot of them in the Hall of Fame. And a lot of the players had just come back from World War II. And I remember one day sitting on a tackling dummy out there, my brother and myself, and watching scrimmage. And believe me, there was bloodletting in those days. I mean, they weren't as big. The equipment wasn't as great, any of it as today, but it was true bloodletting. I mean, it was the ancient. It was the samurai warriors watching this, and so there was a player that was hit and kind of looked like he was knocked out in the field. And in those days, they just keep walking. Uh, you didn't have anybody necessarily rush out. And one of the players after practice looked at me and kind of saw that I was disturbed by it. I wasn't crying or anything. I knew he was a veteran, and he said to me, "This is nothing, son. We used to kill people," and that always stayed with me. A form of that those men that came back from that war, and I'm sure it's in France and Britain and every place on the continent. Once, and I even kind of noticed in my father a little bit that that even though when he came back, he drank, he gambled, he did everything. That he was a wild man, but there was something about him that always seemed so much older and wiser. And I think anybody who's been through that, and it's stuck with me. That's 1946. That's stuck with me to today. That there was an element of what they saw and what they did, and how they carried it into football. That this was nothing. Break your leg, break your arm, bust your mouth up, whatever it is. And I'm not advocating macho stuff. I'm just saying that taught me that one of the things, the realism of what it was and how it carried through. And you then looking at the league as it started to grow, and at that time there was when newspaper sports editors were more powerful than the president. They controlled everything. And there was a guy by the name of Arch Ward who was the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune. Powerful a guy. And my father was always kind of careful with him. He was the one that put in the baseball all-star game and the pro college football game too. They were the two biggest games in America. First time I went to the Chicago Stadium, Soldiers Field, I explained in my book, it was incredible. Men dressed to the nines with their hats on, and women dressed like they were going to the theater, and cigarette smoke whirling all over the place, and these people coming out in the field, the roar of the crowd, 90,000 people. An amazing scene. But again, my father understood that there was another league, the All America Conference. And as I said, in that league was today, still I say today, should be considered one of the greatest teams of all time. The Cleveland Browns, who went to 10 straight championship games. The San Francisco 49ers and the Colts, who went in and out of business. But you could kind of feel there was a growth there, that even though it wasn't the big TV game it was today, I could begin to see just the beginnings of a challenging baseball. And then, of course, my father affecting the merger in 1950 and saying basically the Browns were better. I always thought the Cleveland Browns, I thought were better than any team in the NFL at that time. I don't care who the hell they were. And I saw the Steelers win two championships. But you could see it slowly but surely. But then you look at Bert Bell, NFL draft, the use of television, the use of ex-FBI officials, not letting the league close down, making up the schedule full time, and then one of his great moments when he went into the league meetings and said, "Gentlemen, what happens if an NFL championship game ends up tie at the end of the game? What the hell do we do? We can't. Do we flip a coin and look ridiculous and send one of them to the All-Star game in Chicago?" So he recommended a 15-minute overtime or continue to play. It's his called sudden death. It was real sudden death then. It's not now. So he got it passed, not by a lot, but he got it passed. And then to be there that day and see history again with the rule that he put in. It was the last championship game he ever saw, basically. And to be there and watch Johnny Unitas drive that team, 2 minutes left, the length of the field, almost kick the field goal, tie the game. And what's interesting is America, with that game, it just set it off in America. I mean, people couldn't believe it. But the other thing is, do you know that some of the Giants players didn't know what the hell the rule was? It was so revolutionary. They were going like, I think Sam Huff and Connolly, they came out and, well, what the hell do we do now? But that's what it was. Joe DiMaggio, Melville, all of the big people in New York that not only came to the game, but that sold the NFL. In fact, many books have been written, one in particular that credits my father, called The Greatest Game Ever Played. That really started the league on its way. And then from there, I mean, you have through the 60s, I went to the Baltimore Colts training camp. That's another story. 1933, 34, there were two players at the University of Pennsylvania. My father was a coach then. One was Carroll Rosenblum, and the other was Marty Brill. They both had tired of Penn and wanted to transfer to Notre Dame. Unlike the portals today, where everybody can play for 6 years and make $100 million in college. And so my father says to Carroll Rosenblum, don't go. This is where you are. Your business is in Baltimore, your father, everything else like that. Years later, when the Colts had failed once, he called the same Carroll Rosenblum and said, Carroll, I need you to bring this franchise back to Baltimore. Rosenblum in the beginning wanted no part of it. Said, you can't make any money. You can't make any money with this. My father said, trust me. So for $15,000, Carroll Rosenblum bought the Baltimore Colts back to Baltimore. And that's how, when my father dropped dead in 1959, in 1960, I went to my first Colts training camp and then met and was there for 10 years two greatest quarterbacks in history, and I've seen them all: Otto Graham, Sammy Ball, today Dan Marino, you name them. Two greatest quarterbacks I've ever seen are Tom Brady and John Unitas. Neither one of them were scramblers. Neither one of them had, well, Unitas had a really strong arm, but they were pocket quarterbacks. Unitas put in the 2-minute drill. Unitas would call at the line of scrimmage. He took a terrible beating in those days. But they are the two that I would say, of all of them that I've seen, the two best. And yet they weren't scramblers like today's quarterbacks. They were just something completely different from anything else that I saw, and still remain that way today. So spending the 10 years at the Colts, seeing the great Packer dynasty, Vince Lombardi, all of the games that we played, the sudden death game, it really gave me I kind of move along in life. I don't stay in one particular position and say, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of I don't believe in that. And so from there to the New England Patriots, where basically I helped build it, but then got in the fight with the owners and got fired. So I understood what it was like to get fired too, and where to go from there. And then owning my own team in the World Football League, and then eventually coming back after the league went down and spending the last 40 or 50 years in radio and television. I mean, I could spend another 2 or 3 hours telling you stories that are all true about every part of not only sports, politics, music, you name it. Because luckily, as a young man, I was exposed to more worlds than just football, show business, business itself, you name it. And so that kind of gave me the background to say, what do you want me to do? I'll find a way to do it. Anyway,